Harborview was peaceful until the roar of motorcycle engines shattered the silence. 4 men approached, unaware they had picked the wrong opponent. It was a serene Sunday afternoon in the small coastal town of Harborview. The golden rays of the setting sun danced across the waves, and the salty ocean breeze carried the scent of seaweed and distant adventure. The park by the marina was alive with the sounds of children laughing, seagulls squawking, and couples strolling hand in hand. At a weathered bench near the shoreline, a 17-year-old boy named Ethan sat quietly, flipping through a worn-out notebook filled with sketches of ships and lighthouses. His headphones hummed softly with the notes of acoustic guitar. Ethan wasn't the type to attract attention. With his dark hair swept messily over his forehead and a loose hoodie pulled snug against the breeze, he blended into the peaceful scenery like the rocks on the shore. But today, fate had different plans. His 10-year-old sister, Mia, was at the nearby playground, finishing a game of hide-and-seek with her friends. As Ethan watched over her from a distance, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sound came first, the unmistakable growl of motorcycle engines cutting through the tranquility like a knife. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he looked up. 4 motorcycles rolled into the parking lot, their chrome gleaming under the fading sunlight. The men who dismounted were anything but ordinary tourists. Leather jackets, tattoos, and smirks plastered across their faces made them stand out against the backdrop of families enjoying their day. They moved with an air of dominance, scanning the park like predators searching for prey. Ethan's heart skipped a beat when he realized their gaze had landed on him. The leader of the group, a man with a scar running across his cheek, tilted his head slightly, as if measuring Ethan's worth from afar. The others followed suit, exchanging whispers and chuckles. Ethan tried to ignore them, returning his focus to the sketches in his notebook, but he could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him like storm clouds rolling in. "Stay calm," Ethan reminded himself, tracing the lines of a ship he had drawn earlier. "It's just another group passing through town. They'll be gone soon." But the heavy footsteps crunching against the gravel told him otherwise. The footsteps drew closer, deliberate and heavy. Ethan pretended to stay engrossed in his notebook, but every fiber of his body tensed. He could hear them now, the scuff of boots against gravel, the faint rustle of leather jackets in the wind. His fingers clutched the edge of the notebook, knuckles whitening. "Hey, kid." The voice was rough, like sandpaper scraping against wood. Ethan glanced up to see the scarred man towering over him, his companions forming a loose semicircle around the bench. Their grins weren't friendly. They were the kind of smiles that carried the promise of trouble. "You lost or something?" the man asked, leaning slightly forward. His breath carried the faint scent of cigarettes and beer. This isn't exactly a place for daydreamers. Ethan closed his notebook calmly and placed it beside him. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Never show fear, Ethan. Even when your heart races, keep your head steady." "I'm waiting for my sister," Ethan replied, keeping his voice even. "We're heading home soon." The man chuckled, glancing at his friends as if Ethan had just told a joke. "Home, huh? You sure you're gonna make it there in one piece?" One of the other men, a burly guy with a patchy beard, circled behind the bench, his boots crunching the pebbles. "Maybe we should help him out," he suggested, cracking his knuckles. Ethan's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. Years of self-defense training had taught him to stay grounded, to analyze threats without panicking. His gaze swept over the men, 3 of them, all bigger than him, but none prepared for someone who knew how to fight with precision. Still, fighting should be the last option, he reminded himself. Avoid escalation if you can. The scarred man smirked and leaned in closer. "You look like the quiet type, kid. Maybe you don't know how things work around here." Ethan met his gaze, his jaw tightening. "I know enough." The man's smirk faded, replaced by a glimmer of irritation. "Got a smart mouth, huh?" Behind them, The sound of children playing faded as parents began to gather their kids. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows across the park. Ethan scanned the area discreetly, hoping someone would notice the tension, but most of the families were too preoccupied packing up their belongings to pay attention. The burly man behind him stepped closer, his shadow falling over Ethan's notebook. "What do you think, boss? Should we teach him a lesson?" Ethan remained seated, his mind racing. If they made a move, he'd have to act fast, strike hard, and end it quickly before things spiraled out of control. But just as he was calculating his next move, a familiar voice cut through the growing tension. "Ethan!" It was Mia running toward him with her backpack swinging at her side. She stopped a few yards away, her bright eyes wide with confusion. "Who are they?" The bikers shifted their attention toward Mia, their smiles growing wider. The scarred man straightened up, taking a step toward her. "Is that your sister, kid? Cute little thing." Ethan shot to his feet, placing himself between Mia and the men. His stance was subtle but ready, feet firmly planted, knees slightly bent, hands loose but prepared to strike. "Don't go near her," he said, his voice steady but cold. The scarred man raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Protective, aren't we? Relax. We're just having a friendly chat." "I don't think this is friendly," Ethan said, eyes locked on the man. "You should leave." The burly man laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "Look at this kid, trying to play hero." Ethan's gaze darted toward Mia. "Go to the playground now," he said firmly. "But now, Mia." Reluctantly, she backed away, her small footsteps fading into the distance. Ethan felt a wave of relief, but knew the real test was just beginning. The men weren't here to talk. They wanted a show of dominance, and they had chosen the wrong target. The scarred man took another step forward, his hand reaching out as if to shove Ethan back. "Let's see how tough you really are." But before his hand could connect, Ethan moved. With a fluid motion, Ethan sidestepped the man's outstretched arm, grabbing his wrist and twisting it downward. The man grunted, caught off guard by the speed and precision of the move. Ethan didn't let go. Instead, he used the man's momentum to shove him backward, causing him to stumble. The burly man lunged next, swinging a wide punch aimed at Ethan's face. But Ethan ducked, his body reacting instinctively. He drove a sharp elbow into the man's ribs, eliciting a painful groan. Without missing a beat, he delivered a low kick to the man's knee, sending him collapsing to the ground. The third biker hesitated for a split second, clearly re-evaluating the situation. Ethan used the opportunity to pivot and face him head-on. The biker threw a wild punch, but Ethan blocked it, following up with a precise strike to his solar plexus. The man gasped, clutching his chest as he staggered backward. By now, a small crowd had gathered near the edge of the park, watching in stunned silence. Someone had pulled out a phone and was recording the scene, but Ethan barely noticed. His focus remained on the scarred man, who was now back on his feet, his face flushed with anger. "You're gonna regret that," the man spat, charging forward like a bull. Ethan sidestepped again, this time sweeping his leg under the man's feet and sending him crashing to the ground. The man groaned, but Ethan didn't press the attack. Instead, he stood tall, his breathing steady, and addressed all three men. "Enough," he said, his voice firm. "Walk away." For a moment, the only sound was the distant crash of waves against the shore. Then, slowly, the scarred man picked himself up, glaring at Ethan with a mix of fury and disbelief. "This isn't over," he growled. Ethan didn't flinch. "Maybe it should be." The man hesitated, then motioned for his friends to follow. Muttering curses under their breath, they limped back to their bikes and roared away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. As the roar of the motorcycles faded into the distance, Ethan remained standing, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the bikers had been. His chest rose and fell steadily, but inside, adrenaline still coursed through his veins like a racing tide. The wind carried the sounds of applause, and he turned to see the small crowd that had gathered near the park entrance. Parents whispered to one another, children pointed in awe, and a few teenagers clapped enthusiastically. But Ethan wasn't looking for applause. His eyes searched for Mia, who came running toward him, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Ethan!" she cried, flinging herself into his arms. "Are you okay?" He knelt down, wrapping his arms around her. "I'm fine," he whispered, smoothing her hair. "I'm okay." Mia pulled back, her lip trembling. "I was so scared. They were so big and—" "I know," Ethan interrupted gently, giving her a reassuring smile. "But it's over now. They're gone." She sniffled, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. "What if they come back?" Ethan's smile faltered for a brief moment. He knew there was a chance the bikers weren't done with him. The scarred man's parting words echoed in his mind. This isn't over. But he couldn't let Mia see his doubt. She needed to feel safe. "If they do, we'll handle it together," he said, his voice steady. "But I don't think they will." Mia nodded slowly, though her grip on his arm didn't loosen. He stood up, taking her hand. "Come on, let's get home before Mum starts to worry." The crowd began to disperse as they made their way out of the park. A few people gave Ethan nods of approval or whispered words of admiration, but he barely acknowledged them. His focus was on Mia, who walked quietly beside him, her small hand still clinging to his. By the time they reached their small white house on the corner of Maple Street, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights flickered to life. Their mother, Caroline, was waiting on the front porch, her arms crossed and a worried expression on her face. "You're late," she said, her voice a mix of relief and frustration. "I was about to call you." Ethan exchanged a glance with Mia, who suddenly seemed interested in the cracks on the sidewalk. "We ran into some trouble at the park," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "But everything's fine now." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Ethan hesitated, but before he could answer, Mia blurted out, "There were these guys on motorcycles, and they tried to hurt Ethan, but he fought them off, and they ran away." Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. "Ethan, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he reassured her quickly. "Really, they didn't get a chance to do much." Her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pride as she stepped forward and placed her hands on his shoulders. "You should have called the police." "I didn't want to escalate things," Ethan replied. "They're gone now, and I don't think they'll come back." Caroline exhaled sharply, as if trying to release the tension building in her chest. "You did the right thing by protecting Mia. But promise me something, Ethan. Don't take risks like that unless you have no other choice." "I promise," he said, meeting her gaze. And he meant it. Violence had never been his first option, and it never would be. Caroline pulled him into a tight hug, and for a moment, the weight of the day melted away. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "for being brave, but also for knowing when to stand up for what's right." That night, as Ethan lay in bed, sleep eluded him. The events of the day played on a loop in his mind. The biker's smug expressions, the sound of his heartbeat in his ears, the way his body had reacted instinctively to every threat. He should have felt relief, but instead, there was a lingering sense of unease. He rolled over, staring at the ceiling as the scarred man's words echoed again. "This isn't over." Ethan knew enough about people like that to understand the warning wasn't an empty threat. They weren't the type to let humiliation slide easily. But as he lay there, the fear he'd felt earlier began to transform into something else. Determination. He couldn't control what the bikers did next, but he could control how he prepared for it. Tomorrow, he'd head to the gym, run through his training routines, and sharpen his reflexes. He wasn't looking for a fight, but if one came his way, he'd be ready. With that thought, his breathing slowed, and he finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Ethan walked Mia to school, the cool morning air biting at their cheeks. She skipped along happily, as if the events of the previous day were nothing more than a distant memory. But Ethan's senses remained heightened, scanning the streets for any sign of trouble. As they approached the school gates, Mia tugged on his sleeve. "Are you coming to my soccer game after school?" He smiled, ruffling her hair. "Wouldn't miss it." After dropping her off, Ethan made his way toward the local gym. The familiar smell of sweat and rubber mats greeted him as he stepped inside. He wrapped his hands in tape and headed for the punching bag, each strike releasing the tension that still lingered in his muscles. Half an hour into his workout, a shadow loomed behind him. He turned to see a familiar face, the scarred man from the park, leaning casually against the wall, watching him with a smirk. "Didn't think you'd be so easy to find," the man said, pushing off the wall and walking toward Ethan. "Guess I was wrong." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "What do you want?" The man shrugged, his eyes glinting with something between amusement and menace. "Just a little chat, no fists this time, unless you want to make it interesting." Ethan took a step back, fists lowering slightly, but his mind was on high alert. "I'm not interested in starting anything." "Too bad," the man replied, his smirk widening. "Because this time you won't have a crowd to impress." Ethan's heart thudded in his chest, but his face remained composed. He unwrapped the tape from his hands slowly, keeping his gaze locked on the scarred man. The gym was mostly empty, just a few people lifting weights or jogging on the treadmills, too absorbed in their own routines to notice the brewing confrontation. "What do you want?" Ethan repeated, his tone calm but firm. The man circled him like a predator sizing up its prey. "You embarrassed me yesterday," he said, his voice low. "No one humiliates me in front of my crew and gets away with it." Ethan exhaled slowly, suppressing the urge to retaliate. Violence wasn't the answer, not unless it was the only option. "I didn't embarrass you. You did that to yourself by picking the wrong fight." The man's eyes darkened. "You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "But guts won't help you when you're outnumbered." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept them lowered. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning," the man said, his smirk returning. "I've got friends, more than you can handle. You should be worried." Ethan took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Maybe you should be too," he said, his voice steady. "Because the next time you come after me or my sister, I won't hold back." The man chuckled, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his laughter. "Big talk, but let's see how tough you are when it's not just me." Ethan watched as the man turned and walked away, pushing the gym doors open and disappearing into the sunlight. The tension in Ethan's body didn't ease until he was sure the man was gone. He wiped the sweat from his brow and grabbed his water bottle, replaying the encounter in his mind. By the time Ethan got home that afternoon, the weight of the encounter lingered heavily on his mind. He couldn't risk Mia being caught in the crossfire if the bikers made good on their threat. Sitting at the kitchen table, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. After a moment of hesitation, he dialed a number. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was familiar. His karate instructor, Mr. Bennett, who had trained him for years. "Mr. Bennett, it's Ethan. I need some advice." Within an hour, Ethan was at the dojo, the wooden floors creaking slightly under his feet. Mr. Bennett stood in the center of the room, arms crossed as he listened to Ethan recount what had happened. "Sounds like you handled yourself well," Mr. Bennett said when Ethan finished. "But if they're planning to come back with more people, you'll need to be ready." Ethan nodded. "I don't want to fight them, but I won't let them hurt my sister." Mr. Bennett's expression softened. "Protecting your family is important, but remember, violence should always be a last resort. There are other ways to handle this." "I understand," Ethan replied. "But what if they don't back down?" Mr. Bennett stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Then you stay calm, stay focused, and use what you've learned. Control the situation before it controls you. Ethan spent the next 2 hours running through drills, blocking, evading, and striking with precision. By the time he left the dojo, his muscles ached, but his mind felt sharper. He wasn't just preparing for a fight, he was preparing for whatever came next. The following evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of indigo, Ethan walked Mia home from her soccer practice. The streets were quiet, the distant hum of traffic the only sound accompanying their footsteps. "Ethan?" Mia asked, breaking the silence. "Do you think those guys will come back?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know, but if they do, we'll be ready." As they turned the corner onto their street, Ethan's heart sank. Parked across the road from their house were 2 motorcycles, the engines idling softly. Standing next to them were the scarred man and 2 others, their silhouettes barely visible in the fading light. Ethan's grip on Mia's hand tightened. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door and stay with Mom." "But go, Mia. Now." She nodded reluctantly and ran toward the front door, glancing back once before disappearing inside. Ethan took a deep breath and crossed the street, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The scarred man smirked as Ethan approached. "I told you this wasn't over." Ethan stopped a few feet away, planting his feet firmly on the ground. "I don't want trouble," he said. "But if you force it, you won't like the outcome." The man chuckled darkly. "We'll see about that." Without warning, one of the men lunged at Ethan, his fist swinging wide. But Ethan had been waiting for it. He sidestepped smoothly, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. The man yelped in pain as Ethan shoved him forward, sending him stumbling into the scarred man. The second attacker charged, throwing a flurry of punches, but Ethan blocked them with ease. He delivered a swift kick to the man's shin, followed by a palm strike to his chest that sent him sprawling onto the pavement. Now it was just the scarred man, who stood motionless, his smirk replaced by a look of uncertainty. "You think this is over just because you got lucky?" Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, his breathing steady. "It's over when you decide to walk away." The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "You'll regret this." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You will, if you don't leave." For a moment neither of them moved, the tension thick in the air. But then the sound of a distant police siren echoed through the night, growing louder. The scarred man cursed under his breath and motioned to his companions. "Let's go." Ethan watched as they mounted their motorcycles and sped away, the roar of their engines fading into the distance. He didn't relax until the sound was gone completely. As Ethan walked back to his house, the front door opened, and Mia ran out to meet him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fine," Ethan replied, kneeling down to hug her. "It's over now." Their mother appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern. "What happened?" "I'll explain inside," Ethan said, guiding them both inside and locking the door behind him. As they sat around the kitchen table, Ethan recounted everything, from the encounter at the gym to the final showdown on their street. His mother listened intently, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I'm proud of you," she said when he finished. "But I want you to promise me something." "What is it?" "Promise me that you'll always find another way before resorting to this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're strong, Ethan. But strength isn't just about fighting, it's about knowing when to walk away." Ethan nodded, her words sinking in. "I promise." That night, as he lay in bed, the weight of the past few days finally lifted. He knew the bikers might return one day, but he also knew that fear wouldn't control him. He had faced them, protected his family, and come out stronger. Sometimes standing your ground wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it away. And with that thought, Ethan finally drifted off to sleep. If this story inspired you with its message of courage, determination, and the power of family, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. And make sure to share this video with friends or anyone who needs a reminder that true strength comes from protecting what matters most.